A Swift Kick in the Ass, episode 44.
All big changes start with a swift kick in the ass. Join the journey of lifelong friends, John Curran and Tom Stewart, as they make conventional thought bend over and take a boot to the keister. Warning, listeners may notice a force equal to or greater than needed to get your ass moving. A swift kick in the ass, living life on your terms.
Welcome, I'm Tom Stewart, and I'm joined with my lifelong childhood friend, John Curran. And today's show, don't let the door hit you on the ass on the way out. Job loss. Yeah, it sucks, but it doesn't have to. John?
Yeah, it does suck. About 5 years ago, I faced my position being eliminated in the company I had been with for 10 years. Actually, it was just shy of 10 years. And the economy was going south, and the company started doing mass layoffs. I think the economy is doing better now, but you still see it time and again. I think that change in our economy changed things for all of us. Job security is really something of the past, unfortunately. And if you really stop and think about it, companies are just doing what's good for the company. They need to do things to stay viable, to keep that company alive. And sometimes that does require letting people go. Now, I was very fortunate. 2 months after my position was eliminated, I was back with the same company, making more money and working at home officially, which I love. I don't see myself ever going back into the office again. But, during that time, I had a lot of my fellow coworkers who were also laid off, and I saw that each and every one of them behaved a little bit differently, took it differently. And for me, I was like, I kind of wanted it to end. I wanted to get out. I was tired of what I was doing. And I also came to the conclusion that, the company is just doing what's best for the company. I need to do what's best for me. And I think that if you're facing job elimination now, or I think we could all face it in the future. I'm no exception now myself, but I don't fear it like I used to.
Now, I had a different experience. I did lose my job in 2009, same thing as half the population of the United States went through the same problems. My company laid off 3,500 people, and I got caught up in that 3,500, and I found myself out of work for, I want to say it was like 16 months. It was a long time. Now, I had a 9-month severance, which was very good. So I wasn't feeling the brunt of it right away. I was like, hey, this is, they treated me fairly. 9 months, I was happy with. Some people get 2 weeks or nothing at all, So
I think I got 3 months, 3 or 4 months after 10 years, being there 10 years. But the way I looked at it as well is that when you get a severance, and I think I was treated very fairly, and no problem with that. But so if you have a severance, there was, and of course every company, the severance package might be a little bit different, but that severance ended if I accepted a position back with the company. It did not end if I got another job elsewhere. So the way I was looking at it, and the silver lining that I was thinking of, is that, hey, you know what? I'll have a severance for 4 months, and then I have another job. And if I can make, just as much as I was making before, I just doubled my income for 4 months. And imagine what you could do with that money if you had that type of income.
I almost had that opportunity. The day that I got let go, my old boss had called me from another company and said, hey, I want you to come down here and work for me. However, he was in the same market. I work in radio, and I had a non-compete. If I would have gone down there, even though I'm an engineer, which really non-competes, I don't see why that applies to engineering. On air talent, I can understand because you could bring audience with you, but no one knows who I am. But basically I had signed an agreement that said if I go to work for another competing radio station, I lose my severance. And I was like, man, 9 months. I'm not sure if I want to lose 9 months, maybe hold out and, then I'll take it after, or I'll look into it. So it's definitely, you have to kind of weigh your options.
Yeah, and Zig Ziglar had a great quote, and he said, "One of the hardest decisions you'll ever face in life is choosing whether to walk away or try harder." And I think that the way the world is changing so quickly, especially with technology, we are all, there's a great chance they're going to be losing jobs in other sectors. That's going to continue on regardless of if the economy is good or not. I'll use bookstores as an example. Brick and mortar bookstores are pretty much out of business. And why is that? It's because of Amazon and because of other web-based ways of delivering product and services. It's changed the nature of our economy. Postal workers, another great example. Postal service is not doing good. They keep on having to raise their prices, and that's a government position. You never ever consider layoffs or being let go from a government job.
Can I tell you something that surprised me today, though? Today is a Sunday. This is when we're recording, and I had a postal worker deliver something today, and I was like, wait a second, it's Sunday. But they were delivering for Amazon. So they must have worked out some kind of service. It just took me back. I was like, wow, a Sunday delivery, and it's from the post office. It's not from, anyway, it's not from UPS or FedEx. It's from the United States Post Office. Really intrigued me.
We all have to change. And that's good. I think in order to keep people working, they have to adapt. Now, I think of people who knew old programming languages, and I'm not a technical person, computer programmer, but I do know that Fortran and I think C++ and some other languages that used to be used in computing have died. So if you know these languages and you're in a dying language, you have to continue. You have to learn something else. You have to learn some other type of language so you can keep yourself marketable. And I know that's exactly why I was able to, be back with the same company in 2 months. I have a lot of very marketable skills. And I think that's because when I first started working in healthcare, my first manager told me, she said, don't stay in any one position more than 2 to 3 years. Jump around and do different things within the company and become a jack of all trades. And therefore, you'll know so much about the company that you'll make yourself very valuable. So I had the education and I had the experience, and I actually had the right attitude. I was ready to go out and do something new. And, it was kind of like the mob. I thought it was out, but they pulled me back in because it was just too, I came back and I got the same benefits back again. I had tenure. I didn't lose really anything. In fact, I gained everything. I made more money. I worked from home. It worked out really good for me.
One thing too is, because like I said, I work in radio, and radio is one of those things that's on the verge of maybe it's not dying because, TV came along and said it was going to kill radio back in the 50s or whatever. And radio survived because it's a great medium. However, it is suffering because you have apps like Pandora, iHeartRadio app, and different things that are coming out that are going to make listening to the radio kind of obsolete. So yeah, it scares me, but the skills that I've learned as a technician in radio can be carried over to, app development and everything. Audio is audio. You still need to have something good going in before it goes to whatever, if it's transmitting over an app or if it's transmitting through a, 100,000 watt radio transmitter and on up a tower, but the thing is that it kind of wised me up. I was like, I'm not going to make myself only know things about radio transmitters. I'm going to learn about new media. New media is growing, and that's where radio is heading. So let me learn about radio, new media. Podcasting is new media. So I tried to step up my game and try to be ahead of the technology. So if a change comes, because I'm moving right now, we're co-locating with our TV stations, and we're going down from, I think, 16 studios to about 8. So we're cutting, things down. You kind of wonder, well, if we have less studios to serve, are they going to cut staff? Who knows? Maybe they're not. But, you have to be prepared. And I think that developing skills on the side, not just coming home and watching TV and, kicking back, but, researching something that you're interested or something that you think can make you valuable, learn a new skill so that you become resourceful. If you get let go, at least you hit the ground running.
There's a large group of people out there these days that believe in survivalism, and they believe that, the whole world is going to crap and that the poop is going to hit the fan. And you always see, but, you read about it more and more in the newspaper and on TV, in the news. And they, I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, but I do believe what they say when they say that, you know what, material possessions, they're just material possessions. They can be taken away from you, just like your lunch money in middle school. The bully can come and take your lunch money away, or your lunch. You don't eat lunch. Your car can be taken away. Your property can be taken away. Any material possession can be taken away, but your knowledge and your skills will never, ever be taken away. And like Tom said, it's good to invest in yourself and invest in teaching yourself new skills and ways to apply knowledge, which, ways to gain wisdom. Wisdom is just applied knowledge. So become wiser and better. And that can never, ever be taken away from you.
It's funny you mentioned that, because that was one of the very main things that my dad instilled in me. He was, I think there's a quote by Benjamin Franklin that speaks about never being able to take away your knowledge. And it's true. I mean, no matter, when I went to, when I was in the Air Force and we went through survival school, they take everything away from you. They take your food, they take your clothes, they take your dignity, everything. But if you have your knowledge how to survive, and get through it, then you'll make it through the next day, and not break down mentally.
It's funny. My dad was telling me about the same thing. He was in the Air Force, and I mean, my dad, he taught us a lot of the same things. But he said that boot camp was designed to do one thing: to break you down and to build you back up in a way that benefits, that armed service. You're right. It takes away your personality. It breaks you down. It just breaks you down so far that you become almost a new person in some ways, or you can be. It's almost like brainwashing.
I'm still a little bitter. I was in the Air Force, and when I went through basic training, I was very good in keeping my locker perfect. Everything was good. So I figured, hey, let me help out some of the other guys. And so I kind of had my system down where there were certain clothes I wouldn't take, because they check like if your clothes are folded, if your underwear is in this perfect square. And, so I just used certain ones and washed certain clothes and kept other ones, perfectly hooked up in my locker. I kind of had like a little scam going on. Well, scams catch up with you. And what I didn't know is that they came in and sabotaged my clothes and put like all these tags and stuff inside my clothing, which would get you demerits. And when they came in and did an inspection, the drill instructor, they had brought in the high ranking drill instructor. He came in and he goes, let me see, who is my superhero on this side of the flight, right? And he comes over and he goes, Mr. Stewart, do you like games, Mr. Stewart? And I was like, no, sir. And he goes, well, I like games, and he goes, heads or tails? And I said, tails. And it landed on heads. And he goes, pack your bags. And they sent me back 3 weeks to, your basic training at that time was 6 weeks. So basically I would have to do 3 more weeks. And what it was, they sabotaged my locker. He didn't even inspect it. He knew that he had sabotaged it and that I didn't check. And so they sent me back for about a day, and I'm like, man, this sucks. I hate the Air Force, man. This actually bites because, I had paid for my wife to come up to visit me and go to, visit me on graduation day and so forth. And so I was really bummed. So after the end of the day, they brought me and it was 2 other guys, and they brought us back to the 6-week flight. But then he goes, well, we're letting you back, but we're taking away your town pass. And so it ended up where I had to cancel my wife's flights, to come see me because it didn't make sense. She come see me on the base. I couldn't leave base. So she'd come see me graduate, and that would be it. And it would be like, a peck on the cheek and bye, I'll see you another 6 months. So I said, don't waste your money, don't come. And we didn't see each other until we actually, on our wedding, right shortly before our wedding. We were boyfriend and girlfriend back then. So,
yeah, that's, it's wild. I didn't go through the military. I went through college. And what I learned in college is that you have to just follow marching orders. If the teacher says, read this, you better well read it. If they say, write this, you better well write it. Otherwise, you're not going to pass. But if you just follow exactly what they say to the letter, I found school to be very easy. After I learned that, it took me about 2 years probably on almost getting kicked out of school to learn that. But, after I learned it, that was it. They just put those hurdles in front of you, and you have to learn how to get over them.
Something real funny is, I went to school as well, but I was doing it simultaneously as I was going to in the military. And I called one of my professors one day because we had to fly out, and I worked on this big 747 that had, all kinds of communications. So it actually had telephones. And this was before people had cell phones and stuff. And I called my professor and I say, hey, look, my plane had to leave because of weather. I'm not going to be able to make it to class today. Is that okay? And he was like, I am just blown away that you're calling me from an airplane. He goes, absolutely. I thought that was cool.
So, we don't want to digress too much from this. This is we're thinking of really funny names to call this episode about, layoffs and job elimination, but it's not funny, and it can hit you very hard. But recognize that it's nothing personal per se. When your position is eliminated or there are mass layoffs, there's some type of formula that the company is applying, and you just, you got the luck of the draw, and it's not related to your performance, or it's nothing personal. So do what's best for you. And, how do you prepare for something like this? And of course, if you lose your job, that means you lose your income until you get another job. So a way to kind of reduce your anxiety, even if you're not threatened by a layoff right here and right now, I have to ask you, do you have an emergency fund? Now, a lot of people will say, 6 months, you need to have 6 months of expenses saved up. I think that's quite extraordinary. Exorbitant. I think that's too much. I think 2 to 3 months would be good to have. If you can have 6 months of expenses saved up, you're going to sleep very well at night. But I think you're going to sleep equally as well if you have 2 to 3 months of expenses saved up. And if you have nothing saved up, and I've been there, every time, Murphy's Law applies, where something happens that you don't expect, it hurts. So the way I've avoided that is just by creating a $1,000 emergency fund to get started. And you're probably saying, man, I'm just barely making it. How am I going to squeeze, blood out of this turnip and save up $1,000? And what I say to you is that there's eBay, there's Craigslist, there's Domino's, or Papa John's, pizza delivery drivers. Do what you need to do, even just for a few months, to save up money and get an emergency fund and put that money aside. You will sleep so much better at night. Sell off those things that you don't need anymore. Simplify your life.
Yeah. It's simple. Downsize. You can always downsize, So, if you have a high car payment, or if you have something that's exorbitant, or, spend too much on cable TV or your internet service, they're not essential. You can downsize.
It's funny. I was just telling my daughter this story earlier today, and she bought her first cell phone. And my wife and I decided, you know what, we're not going to buy you a cell phone. You're 13 years old. You don't need one. We're not going to pay it, and we're not going to sign up for a monthly bill either. So she's been babysitting. She saved up enough money, and she bought her first one. But you know what? She didn't have enough money with her to buy it. she was $2 short. And she said, so I ended up, getting the cash that she had from her, and I paid for it. And as we're walking out the store, she said, "Dad, I had the $2, but it was in change. It was in quarters, and I was embarrassed. I didn't want to pay for that." And I said, "You know what?" I said, "Thanks for telling me that. But you know what? It does suck when you have to pay for things in change. I've had to pay for groceries in change before." I said, you feel about an inch tall when you have to do that. But I said, I'd rather have you learn that now at 13 and know how bad that feels so you can avoid it when you get older. And I don't want you to have to pay for your groceries with change.
So, the question is, did she make you stick out your hand and go, "Here, Dad, here's the $2 I owe you"?
She tried to when we got back to the truck, but I said, "No, I don't want that in dollars." I said, "I have enough change," But I was telling her this story about a roommate of mine that I had. I think it was back in college or back in graduate school, but he had this really nice Camaro, a Camaro RS, and to him back then it was a really nice car, and he couldn't make his expenses, and he was starting to slide on the bills. And I was like, but he could pay his car payment. I was like, you need to do something about this because you need to hold your own weight. I can't, continue to shell out money for you. I don't have it. And I said, you might want to think about selling that car. And he threw this fit, and he said, "Man, I would rather sleep in my car than sell it." And I thought, man, that's just sad. You'd rather have a fancy car and no place to live than have a nice place to live and, a car that gets you from point A to point B. But, he was so wrapped up in that and identified with that car that, he didn't want to give it up. And he ended up I think he ended up getting into a wreck with it. So, like we said earlier, material possessions can be taken away from you either by, somebody else taking it, or you could wreck it. It's just a material possession. It's going to come and go out of your life. So
I'm going to need you to go ahead and come in tomorrow. I'm also going to need you to go ahead and come in on Sunday, too.
Office space.
Yeah,
just have to say, there's some perks when you do lose your gig. You don't have to deal with buttholes like that anymore.
A lot of people, think about when they think about their financial situation, they think about their income and ways to boost their income. But you have to realize that in that equation, it's not only income, but it's your expenses as well. And if you decrease your expenses, decrease your cost of living, then you don't need to make such a large income. It's if you simplify your life and, you move from a big fancy house to something more modest, that your cost of living is going to go down way, exponentially go down. And you won't feel so pressured to work as hard. You won't need a high demand, a high salary job to support that lifestyle.
Some of the things that
also another way out.
Yeah. Some of the things that I do right now and me and my wife is we make sure that we bring our lunch. I used to have a habit of going out every day and eating out, and, that adds up. I mean, it's $7 or $8, $9, $10 a day. It's a couple $100 a month just in food, and it's much easier and quicker and, cheaper and healthier to bring my own food.
And also they say that, as far as lifestyle expenses, your mortgage or your rent, whatever you're doing to live somewhere, that's a person's biggest expense. And second is food. And I know for a fact that we were doing the same thing. We were eating out a lot, and not even eating out a lot, but buying pre-packaged, easy to fix food at the grocery store. That our freezers were filled with that stuff, however many years ago it was when I lost my
chicken
my
nuggets
job.
for the kids and potato
Yeah,
chips, and I know.
yeah. And so we I started cooking at old school because I cook in my house. I'm I like to eat, so I like to cook, and I started cook using the Betty Crocker recipe book, and I started making things myself. And even though I can afford to eat to eat prepackaged meals, I choose not to, because I just the way I cook and the way I eat, it changed back then, and I don't want to ever go back. Groceries are a big expense when you have 3 kids and a wife, and you have cats and dogs. It's but it's the number one area where you can really watch your expenses and use that money to spend in other ways. If you have credit card bills, cut back on your food bill, and use that to pay off your bills.
And if you are prepared, then it makes the anxiety, because anxiety sucks. I know when I worked previously for 10 years before I finally got laid off at my previous company. And that entire 10 years, I lived in anxiety because they were letting go a lot of people during that 10 years. I mean, a lot. We went from 300 people down to 79 where I worked. So it was a constant churn of people. They had to stop sending the so-and-so doesn't work here anymore emails, because the morale in the building was just horrible. Everyone's afraid of that, losing their job. And that's how I lived for 10 years. And it didn't happen for 10 years. So, there's nothing you can do. It's just like when we're going to die. We don't know the day when we're going to die, or, anything. But so you can't spend your whole life worrying about it. You can't spend your whole life worrying about losing your job. If you're prepared, it makes the blow a lot softer, but don't ruin yourself with anxiety.
Yeah, no, I was much in the same position. I had been with that company 10 years when they let me go the first time. And I felt stuck in my career. I mean, I felt like I couldn't get promoted because the company wasn't looking for people with me with the skills that I had. It seemed like people who were, the true healthcare professionals, like the doctors and nurses, got preference over, a guy with an MBA to run the business, which didn't make a lot of sense to me. But, again, that's not my decision to make. But I felt stuck, and I dodged a bullet, several times. And each and every time I thought, you know what, I need to get my finances in order. And I lived with that anxiety. But right before my position was eliminated, that's where my wife and I had been working this financial plan to get out of debt. And we were just out, we were up to our eyeballs. I know I've talked about this before, but we were getting traction. And what changed, we're getting traction. And then I lost my job. And I thought, what the hell am I going to do? I have children to provide for. I've got a house to pay for. I've got bills, and, woe is me. But then I thought, you know what? As long as I continue to move forward on my financial plan and get to the place to where I don't owe anybody any money and I have money in the bank, that's all I really care about. It was a few goals that were very simple. It stopped my wife and I from fighting a lot over finances, because we just asked ourselves, hey, does this put money in our bank, or does it help us pay our bills? If it doesn't, the answer is no. And we were making traction. And within 2.5 years, I was able to pay off over $90,000. So, I've been there, and my career goal right now really is retirement. I'm not even 50 years old, but I'm looking, to be done. I want to control my time and my life better. And I'm working towards that. So, you have to prepare. And when you're prepared, you have more control over your life and over the decisions that are brought to you to make. But, for a lot of us, we continue living the same way, and we just let life make those decisions for us. And that's fine. I'm not judging, but Just
But
recognize
it will be
the price that you pay.
It will be a swift kick in the ass and a wake-up call when it happens. So it's better always to be prepared. All right, so I think it's about time to wrap this up, John. Any closing thoughts?
So, too, again, I'll just say, I'll bring up the quote again from Zig Ziglar because I think it's worth repeating. One of the hardest decisions you'll ever face in life is choosing whether to walk away or try harder. So make that decision for yourself and prepare, and you'll get whatever you want.
Good. On that end, thanks for listening. I'm Tom Stewart.
This is John Curran. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. And make sure to subscribe in iTunes. It will help us out tremendously. Till next time, peace.